Pallavi Purkayastha, welcome to ITV Gold again. I hope you're doing well today.
Thank you for having me. I hope you're doing well as well.
Of course, we had to bring you back on ITV Gold because we're less than 15 days from the election, the presidential elections on November 3rd. There's so much to discuss, and you are in Georgia. So let's begin this interview discussing a little bit about what's happening there in the state. What kind of insight could you tell us about how the Democratic and the Republican parties are doing in the state of Georgia? And have you seen any changes from 2016 so far in the state?
Oh, absolutely. There is a huge difference between 2016. Even looking at 2018, what the election of Trump kind of did to the midterms, we have surpassed way over 1 million early voters, which hasn't happened in a very long time. I truly believe this is going to be the high water mark in terms of voter turnout this year. And a lot of it is happening because people are taking advantage of early voting. They are making sure that they're mailing in their ballots. And if you look across the state, the Democratic participation is through the roof. By the time election day comes around, I expect both sides to have increased participation because it's a very high energy, it's a very emotive election cycle, but I am definitely seeing just a lot of energy throughout the state, definitely in Metro Atlanta, definitely in the suburbs, which have been feeling the need to move away from the Republican Party. We see a lot of former Republicans now being very vocal about not just voting for Biden, but voting for Democrats down the ballot. So it's a very high participation year, and I'm excited to see what the numbers look like at 7 p.m. on Tuesday, November 3rd.
For sure. When we are looking at Georgia, Pallavi, traditionally the state has been voting red for as long as we could remember. Do you see a good chance for the state to turn blue this year?
Absolutely. We talk about trends, and we know that it's been maybe about 2 decades since Democrats had control of Georgia. Roy Barnes, I believe, is the last Democratic governor that we had. And you just look at what's been happening every 2 years. In 2014, Michelle Nunn and Jason Carter were on the ticket. They received about 45%. Hillary Clinton fell short by about 5 points. Stacey Abrams fell short by about 1.5 points. And you see the state gradually get younger, gradually get more and more diverse, and you see a lot of Republicans leaving their parties and voting for Democrats now, and you see that trend happening in a way that this year Georgia is absolutely in play. I had the honor of speaking at an event where Doug Emhoff, who will, I believe, be the next second gentleman, who's Kamala Harris's husband, he was here to talk about voter turnout, and you see these presidential tickets put in time, put in resources into Georgia. You can't watch 30 minutes of TV without seeing an ad from Joe Biden. And that shows you that if they're willing to put in the resources, they're seeing something in their polling that suggests that if we put in enough resources, we could absolutely turn Georgia blue. And I feel honored that we've done the groundwork for years and years to get us to this spot right now, and that the Democratic Party is putting in the money, is putting in the manpower to make sure we can get beyond that 50.1% mark that we need to get beyond.
Definitely. What issues matter the most in Georgia, according to you, Pallavi?
Healthcare. It's up and down healthcare. I feel like one of the reasons why we're doing so well is because the people on the other side of the aisle are trying so hard to push this defund the police narrative, which simply isn't working because most Democratic candidates are not for it. And they're trying to focus really into the looting and the rioting. And every person I know has condemned that. Every person I know is standing up for nonviolent protesters, the right to get your voices heard. And what I've seen on the ground is people are much more afraid of losing their health care or being in financial ruin because of an illness than they are about their neighborhood Starbucks getting looted. And now you're seeing the rise, even with the White House at one point said Georgia was leading the nation in infection rates. Every single person who had the coronavirus is now considered a pre-existing condition. And you see the ACA being debated about if it should be struck down or not. And people are genuinely worried that a small surgery, a small illness could financially ruin their families And there are people who have political power to stop that and are simply not doing it. So up and down, anywhere I go, healthcare is the biggest thing. People are worried about what the virus is going to do. They're worried about if they'll be able to get their jobs back because they lost it due to the pandemic. And they're generally worried about if they can afford to get sick. And that's, we've made sure that they know that the Democratic Party is the party that wants to expand Medicaid, wants to make sure that people who don't normally have the resources to go to a doctor, that they don't get bankrupt because of one illness.
Definitely. I mean, we've all seen the ramifications on healthcare system, especially during COVID-19. And we are still looking for an answer to what to do about this healthcare system. Pallavi, let's talk about elections on a broader term here, because I also want to educate our audience in all of the states here that are located in the United States, but also talk about issues that are impacting everyone. Let's start this off by just discussing the most significant voters in this election. Who do you think are the most significant voters or new voters in this election that could maybe change the outcome? And how do you educate those voters the most?
It's hard to pinpoint the most significant voters. At the end of the day, any election in Georgia is won when you hit that 50% plus one mark. So your margin of victory could be your base, or it could be a specific demographic, or it could be new Americans who have never voted before. It could be newly engaged Americans who have never voted before. So depending on the region, I don't believe there's a specific demographic that we need to go after. But what I do think is extremely important is making sure that everybody who wants to vote is able to vote. Here in Georgia, the very first day of early voting, my dad stood in line for almost 3 hours. People were getting turned away for being at the wrong polling precinct when there is no right polling precinct within a county for early voting. There were areas in Cobb County where people were standing for 9, 10, 11 hours in line just to vote. Those tactics are really what we need to be looking at, because at the end of the day, whether it's incompetence, whether it's malice, nobody should have to wait in line for 8 hours to cast their ballots. So in terms of who's the significant population, it's every person who wants to go vote, and whether they're being able to cast their ballot in an appropriate manner of time. It's one thing to wait 30 minutes. It's another thing to tell somebody that they have to give up the entire day and stand in line just to exercise their First Amendment rights. So that would be my answer to what's significant. It's the ability to be able to vote.
What do you say to individuals that are choosing not to vote in this election?
It would depend, again, on their reasoning, right? I understand why somebody would be apathetic. I understand that there have been times where, regardless of who is in power, which party is in power, whether the position is partisan or not, people have not been helped. People have not been served by the people who take on this banner of being a public servant. But I would ask you to see what's at stake. Kamala Harris constantly says healthcare is on the ballot, justice is on the ballot, and frankly, all of those are. If you or someone you know has either contracted the virus or has any kind of pre-existing condition, whether it's diabetes, cancer, asthma, anything at all, if the ACA gets overturned and you live in a state like Georgia where we haven't expanded Medicaid, there is a possibility that you will not have insurance from here on onwards because you are considered too much of a financial risk to insurance companies. So look at what actually matters to you and your family, and see which politician, which candidate is looking to help you out. Because it's one thing to elect the right people and make sure that we're holding their feet to the fire, and it's another thing to let somebody who doesn't have your best interests at heart get elected, because whether you vote or not, you're giving somebody the power to make decisions about your life. So you might as well exercise that power. And then stay involved. The election day is never the finish line. Once you even if the person you want gets elected, make sure that you're contacting them, make sure that you are being vocal about what you and your family need, because it's your taxpayer dollars that's going to their salary, and they should absolutely be serving you.
Right. Looking at the South Asian community here in the United States and the Indo-Caribbean communities and just entirety of the subcontinent, Are we voting, Pallavi, according to you? And what issues are the of most concern when you're looking at the South Asian population, besides healthcare, of course?
Yeah, and we are. We haven't been the best in the past. Asian Americans as a whole, we are the fastest growing demographic in Georgia, and we have probably the lowest voter turnout percentages. That is changing. We are seeing, since Trump got elected, an increased just opinions on politics and an increased need to be civically involved. So we are getting there. It could be a lot better. But I do understand that casting a ballot is not the most accessible thing to people. You have to go out and understand the system. You have to understand who you're voting for. You have to understand, what does a state house person even do? What is the difference between a state senator and a US senator? We have to teach ourselves this entire process before we can even teach ourselves how to vote. And I understand that that could be a hurdle. In terms of what is important to us, I mean, I will have to reiterate that healthcare is important to us. Education is very, very important to our communities. And you saw in the past legislative days in 2019, I apologize, in 2020, that the Republican Party took the lead on cutting $1 billion, billion with a B, from K through 12 education. So making sure that our schools are fully funded, that we have access to colleges. Education is a massive deal to a lot of people who choose to move to areas solely because they have good public schools. And now when you're taking money away from those public schools, our kids are going to hurt, our future generations are going to hurt. I have also seen an increased amount of opinions on the Black Lives Matter movement. I am seeing people come out and say police brutality is wrong. And when police who do wrong aren't held accountable, that hurts everybody. Right. That hurts us as a community. And I'm seeing so many people from our communities who wouldn't normally touch any racial issues now come out to protest, now bring a banner that says Black Lives Matter, now come out and say, you know, no matter what your skin color, we should all be treated equally with equal dignity under the law. So those are the three things that I'm seeing people talk a lot about, and it's exciting to see all of that energy translate into high voting numbers.
Let's talk about these two campaigns that are happening right now, Pallavi. Very different styles of campaigns on both sides. President Trump is going around the nation. He's hosting rallies. Some are wearing masks, some are not. Former Vice President and the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, is hosting it mainly virtually and is addressing audience, but has taken a different approach. What have you felt about these two campaigns, separately, and do you think they're appealing to their voters?
Well, you're seeing all of that kind of trickle down the ballot. I'm working for a candidate in Johns Creek in Georgia, Angelica Couch, who is the current elected representative, and we have suspended all in-person events. We are not knocking on doors. We're not having face-to-face conversations. On the other hand, her candidate is going from door to door without a mask on. And that kind of shows that whatever, our top ballot nominees are doing, it's kind of trickling down to the very local level. You have a state house candidate who, without wearing a mask, is going from one door and knocking on it, having a conversation, going to the next door, maybe being a carrier without even knowing it. He has no idea if the person who opens the door is immunocompromised, but that's not mattering to him because that is the branding of their party now. So we're seeing two very different campaigns, but this is not just a political tactic, right? This has very real life ramifications. If a person is going door to door to door and they're taking a virus in the middle of a pandemic, we're nowhere close to the end of this. We don't have a vaccine yet. It's going to hurt families. It's going to hurt people. And I hope it doesn't, but it might kill somebody if you transmit this disease to them. So we're seeing two very different campaigns. But it's not just President Trump and Vice President Biden, it's people down the ballot and how people choose to make themselves either responsible or they choose to make themselves a brand of somebody who is in the same party of Donald Trump.
Looking at these rallies a little bit more, something that many people have said and what they're accusing President Trump of is the fact that they are perpetuating hate in these rallies. What is your comment on that?
He is. I mean, there's no, I'm not going to make any bones about it. He is perpetuating hate. He has made his last 4 years, including his campaigning, all about white grievance, all about pointing a finger at anybody without taking any kind of stance on his own responsibility. You see just most awful things he said about the governor of Michigan, and then the FBI foils a plan to not kidnap her. It wasn't just to kidnap her. The people who wanted to kidnap her wanted to put her on trial in the middle of the woods and possibly execute her. That is the plan the FBI foiled. And after it was released, all the documents where you could see exactly what these men had planned, who had been radicalized by Donald Trump, he went to another rally and started a chant about locking her up. So this is a president that not only spews hate, but he's successful with it, which is what is very dangerous. He is radicalizing a lot of people who have access to guns, who will very willingly carry out what he tells them to. And you're seeing people just double down on that kind of rhetoric. Here in Georgia, the chairman of the GOP, David Schaefer, put out a tweet saying that the governor should be thanking President Trump because the FBI spoiled these men's plans, rather than taking any kind of action against people who don't wear masks. So you see throughout the country, people absolutely doubling down on what the president is saying. And in doing so, there is just no end in sight. So I do think a lot of the hate is, it's manufactured in a sense to help him. A president that tells a violent white supremacist group to stand by is not doing it on accident. And the problem really is that it's not ending with him. It's a lot of other people who are doubling down on this and making everything he's saying valid. They're validating his viewpoints, and that is really what's dangerous.
What have you felt about the fact that Dr. Anthony Fauci, nation's leading health expert who has been on the front line with COVID-19, has now been politicized by the Trump campaign and also by the president? What has that made you feel like?
It's dangerous. It's, Dr. Fauci has served under, I believe, 6 presidents, either 5 or 6 presidents. This is the first time in his life he has to walk around with a security detail. And that just tells you that anybody who doesn't speak in lockstep with President Trump, who isn't 100% supportive of everything Trump spews, whether it's lies, whether it's dangerous, is immediately an enemy to him. He called Dr. Fauci an idiot. Dr. Fauci is one of the leading doctors in the country. And if we were to listen to him, maybe we would have saved a lot of lives, but instead, the president has taken this pandemic, and really, what's really unfortunate for him is that if he had controlled this with any semblance of competence, he could have turned around his approval numbers. This could have been his one moment to show that he has what it takes to lead. Instead, he went the complete opposite way. All his policies have hurt us. He has talked very negatively about governors and mayors who are trying to mitigate the damage. He has put their lives at risk, and now he is blaming the funny thing is he thinks Dr. Fauci is an idiot, but that didn't stop him from using Dr. Fauci's own words in one of his campaign commercials without getting that authorized. So I think at this point, it's all about what Trump feels helps him with his base, rather than what Trump knows is the right thing to do, which is to save American lives.
This brings me to obviously his competition here, and I would like to take this moment and just have a little bit discussion about the vice presidential Democratic nominee, Senator Kamala Harris, and the impact you think she could have on minority voices across the nation. You are a South Asian woman, so am I. She's half South Asian. It's always been a moment of pride for the entire community. But what kind of message do you think Senator Harris is sending across the nation right now? And do you see her play a vital role in getting more women votes, perhaps in these elections?
Absolutely. I think, I spoke about this a little bit when her husband was down here in Georgia trying to get out the vote. And the one thing, and I truly believe this, I've been, at any given point, I am usually the only Asian American, the only Indian American person in a room during any kind of political event, whether it's on the Democratic side or the Republican side. When I worked at the Capitol, at the Georgia State Capitol, there really weren't a whole lot of people who looked like me. So at one point, you internalize that and you think of yourself as foreign, because when you look at representatives and they're all either white, or if they come from a more Democratic district in the city of Atlanta, they might be Black. And if you look at the Republican side, everybody there is white. And what you look at those images and you look at who's representing you, and you start to other your own self. And then when I see Kamala Harris talk about how her mother moved here from India as a young woman with really nothing in her pockets and made a life out of herself, I see so much of my family's story in what she talks about. And after years of just kind of being one of the very few Indian Americans in a room, I feel seen. I feel as if after years of work, I can put on the TV, and during the DNC, they were talking about her family in India, and she's making those as with Mindy Kaling. A lot of it, it doesn't come off gimmicky to me. It comes up as if she's genuinely trying to put our culture and our heritage on a level of normalcy, as if we are part of the mainstream, and that means a huge amount to me. I also think she's going to be good at turning out the women vote, just because representation matters. Look, at the end of the day, she's talking about things like reproductive rights. She's talking about maternal mortality rate. The fact that Georgia has one of the highest in the countries should make women want to go out and vote for somebody who cares about if they live or die while giving birth. So I'm very excited to see her on the ticket. I definitely cried the day Vice President Biden said that was going to be his running mate, and I'm very excited for the South Asian community, because a lot of us, we work hard, but we've made a splash in engineering and law and business, and I think this is like the one realm that we haven't had a whole lot of representation for, and that's changing, and that's sending such a positive message to women like me, who are still very young in this career, very young in this game, that we can truly go far, and the sky is the limit for us.
Do you think that the ongoing SCOTUS hearing for Judge Barrett to be confirmed on the Supreme Court, do you see that as a big issue for women that are going to vote in these next coming days?
Absolutely. I think, abortion for a lot of people is too much of a taboo subject. There are people who simply don't like to discuss it, and I respect that. But throughout Georgia, when I look at my internal polling of the campaigns I'm running, the amount of people who want abortion to be legal and accessible is well into the high 60s, low 70s. And which includes a big chunk of Republicans. So I think there's a huge amount of people who understand that while they might be anti-abortion themselves, it is not the government's job to decide that for a woman, because the instances of when that is needed can matter so differently from one person to another. Here in Georgia, there was a bill that was wrongly named the Heartbeat Bill that passed, and it was unconstitutional. It required that victims of rape and incest file a police report to have access to abortion. It made miscarriages something that could be criminally investigated. So I think there are because it's not just about banning abortion, it's about everything that comes along with it. And I think there are a lot of people who understand that, there might be an instance where a horrific thing happens and you're not able to carry a child to term, and it's a terrible situation. It's a very private situation, and the government has no business making that into mocking the politics of it and mocking the privacy of it. So I think a lot of women understand that there's a lot at stake. I think it's easy to be anti-abortion when abortion is available, when the threat of it being taken away completely is looming above your head, I think people sing a different tune, and that's what we're seeing right now. And I think, especially with this judge, if you look at all her stances, the fact that she is against IFB, which a lot of, IVF, which a lot of women have been using recently, she doesn't really have a stance on birth control, which I have endometriosis. I was diagnosed with it. There is no cure. I need to take my daily birth control pills as just plain medication. The fact that she doesn't have a clear stance, or she wouldn't say her clear stance on the subject, is making a lot of women very nervous, because we know that reproductive care is so essential to our healthcare.
Yes, that is so true. And, as they always say, we have been fighting for our reproductive rights for God knows how many years. And I think it's time that we are very clear about owning our own bodies. I think it's common sense, according to me. But again, everyone has their own opinions on this. I only have 2 questions left for you here, Pallavi. My first question to you here is, what are your biggest concerns right now as a political analyst?
Voter suppression to some extent. I don't think all of it is malicious. I think some of it is incompetence. But we have seen time and time again in Georgia of things just not getting done properly. In the primaries, we had long lines, not because of huge turnout, but because things like machines were down. Gwinnett County, which is one of the fastest turning counties in terms of turning from red to blue, their machines were put on a truck that didn't fit them. Therefore, when the polling locations opened, they didn't have machines because they didn't have a truck big enough to get the machines from the election board office to the polling centers. Things like this show a massive level of incompetence, to the point that it starts looking like it was done on purpose. So I am worried about voter suppression. I'm not, I think the amount of people who want to vote, I'm not worried about participation. I'm not worried about the energy. I am worried that somebody who is being made to stand in line for 5 hours might decide that they have better things to do because they're losing money for every hour that they're not working, or they have childcare that they need to think about. That is my major concern with this election, especially in Georgia, making sure that people are getting accurate information about mail-in voting, that we're not demonizing mail-in voting the way we have in the past months because of the president. Now, Georgia has never needed an excuse to vote early or to do early voting. But because of the narrative that's coming from the White House, now I'm seeing a lot of Republicans suggest that Democrats are pushing for early voting so that we can mess with the votes, which is a horrible conspiracy theory. It really affects our morale as a democracy. So voter suppression and misinformation, definitely 2 of the biggest things that I'm concerned about, especially in Georgia.
I know that you were impacted by the 2016 election result. I would love to know, what's one lesson you've learned from those elections that you have tried to use in these elections to really get your voice heard and, be represented?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is to continue reaching out to voters. I think a lot of us kind of got a little bit complacent when we saw the polling come out from 2016, and we honestly thought we had it in the bag. I remember when President Trump was announced as the victor, of course I was upset, but I was shocked. And I think a lot of people were really, really shocked, where we didn't think the numbers could have made that result happen, but we also genuinely thought that Americans were better than that Americans would reject the kind of racism, the sexism that he so proudly displayed, and he so proudly made the center of his campaign. And I think just being more in touch with reality, expecting that, the poll results are not what election results are, and knowing that there are going to be people that vote for Trump not in spite of his racism, but because of his racism, and making sure that that is part of our campaign plan so that we can turn out people on our side to counter that kind of thing. So I think the biggest lesson from 2016 is to not take anything for granted, not get too happy about seeing polls where Joe Biden is constantly up, taking that as a ray of hope, but still just keeping our eyes on the prize and not letting go of anything until we cross the finish line on November 3rd.
That's so true. And again, we'd like to, recommend all our viewers, eligible voters, to make sure and go cast their vote. It's so important. No matter who you vote for, make sure your voice is counted. Pallavi, thank you for being with us here on ITV
Of course,
Gold.
thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. I would love for you to give one last message to our audience. You have the entire South Asian community watching you.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I understand that voting is not the most accessible thing. And I don't mean in terms of just walking into a polling place and casting your vote. There's if you ask a random person, do you know where your sample ballot is? Do you know everything that's on your ballot? There's a possibility that they wouldn't know that. So I encourage you to look at your sample ballot. I encourage you to see if there's early voting going on in your state, in your county, what the mail-in voting laws are. If you go to iwillvote.com, IWILLVOT.com. It's a one-stop shop for all things voting, where you can find out what your county is doing, if you can mail in a vote, if there's early voting going on, what your election day polling location is, what your sample ballot looks like. So definitely make sure you take a little bit of time out of your schedule to do that. And I definitely encourage everybody who's eligible to vote to go cast their ballots before or on November 3rd.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for your time here, Pallavi. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity.